In total, the grand jury found there were 34 documents with this critical false statement. Why did Donald Trump repeatedly make these false statements? The evidence will show that he did so to cover up crimes relating to the 2016 election. Donald Trump, executives at the publishing company American Media Incorporated, Mr. Cohen, and others agreed in 2015 to a catch and kill scheme. That is, a scheme to buy and suppress negative information to help Mr. Trump's chance of winning the election. As part of this scheme, Donald Trump and others made 3 payments to people who claimed to have negative information about Mr. Trump.
Good morning and welcome to the National Newspaper Publishers Association's Let It Be Known. Well, former President Donald Trump is officially a criminal defendant. As you saw there, Alvin Bragg, the District Attorney of Manhattan, accused Trump of coordinating a scheme during the 2016 presidential campaign to cover up potential sex scandals and of committing fraud to keep them quiet. Trump pleaded not guilty to 34 felony charges in a Manhattan courtroom. The filings detailed several instances in which Trump allegedly bought the silence of others during the campaign to bury damaging stories. By pointing to those examples, prosecutors described a pattern of behavior that could help convince a jury and a judge, of course, that Trump is guilty. You might be wondering why Trump's sex life, falsehoods, and campaign dealings from years ago are worthy of criminal charges. After all, most of us are used to politicians, particularly Donald Trump, misleading the public. And Trump routinely bragged about his sexual endeavors when he was a celebrity real estate developer. The Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg argued that Trump had gone above embellishing or misleading the public and through the hush money scheme had violated a number of laws to deceive voters. Bragg, as you saw there, said the payment was to hide damaging information from the voting public. We're going to break all of that down this morning. Also, Jill Biden is backing away from her ill-conceived invitation for Iowa's women's basketball team to join the NCAA women's basketball champions, LSU, after much backlash. And, of course, from Angel Reese, who says, we're going to the Obamas. We are not going to the White House. We're going to discuss that. And a member of the Fugees has quietly been on trial in a money laundering case that can land him in prison for decades, and a trial that has Leo DiCaprio, Barack Obama, and a host of other huge names on the witness list. Leo testified yesterday, in fact. We will tell you about that, as well as an incident in Tennessee where the Republican supermajority in the state house are moving to expel 3 Democrats whom the GOP members wildly accuse of trying to incite an insurrection. Joining us this morning, an all-star cast, of course, attorney Robert Tarver, Make It Plain, Mark Thompson, and Lauren Burke of the Burke File. Good morning, everyone. It's good to see this bunch. Y'all are muted at the moment, but
good morning. How's it going?
It's going. Listen, I know Mark is in a precarious position, so I want to start with him before we lose Mark. Mark, you are coming from New York. What's the atmosphere like there? What was it like yesterday? I mean, we saw footages all day long. What was the atmosphere like, and your take on the former president's situation?
Good morning, everyone. It was a pretty routine day in New York. Nothing unusual. The protests that he called for did not materialize. There was no real presence otherwise. And it was just a pretty routine day. There were a lot of spectators and probably tourists on the street, as you saw on television, just taking pictures and being curious about the situation. And anytime something like that happens in New York, you're gonna have that. This is really going to be some case, but it's pretty black and white. They have the evidence. I think that his team is going to probably have to try to come up with objections, mostly on procedural grounds. I think there's an old saying, and I'm paraphrasing, and I'm sure Tarvin knows it. When you can't win the case, you pound the table. And I think that's where they are. Tarvin, help me with it. I'm paraphrasing, but it's pretty cut and dry. There is the very clear evidence that they mischaracterized what these payments were for. They said they were retainers. And in New York, in the state of New York, and this is what Alvin Bragg is known for. This is his lane. They bust people for that.
Right.
That's pretty much it. Now, I agree with Joy Reid. Lastly, when it comes to the Federal Election Commission and all of that, and the presidential election, this and really all of these cases should have been in the purview and jurisdiction of the federal government. They should be bringing this charge, but obviously Merrick Garland and others don't want to do it. But I think it's a pretty open and shut case, and this is just the beginning of a saga, really.
Yeah, and before we get to Attorney Tarver to really break down these charges and what it means, because 34 counts, and I think people still don't understand how to get to 34, and perhaps Tarver can break that down. Lauren, I want to ask you, and Reverend Mark just alluded to it too, about the federal statutes, and that's what some of Trump's supporters, as well as even some critics, are saying. Wait a minute, this sounds like you're overreaching here, Attorney Bragg. This sounds like a federal thing, not a state thing. Lauren, what do you say to that? What are you hearing about that?
It is a federal thing. Merrick Garland and these people don't do anything. Okay, Fannie Willis and Black prosecutors apparently are the only people who can be doing anything with regard to Donald Trump, right? Letitia James, Fannie Willis, Alvin Bragg, who just got there 15 seconds ago. Remember that Robert Morgenthau had been there for 40 years or whatever it was, right? He started in the 1970s. And then Cyrus Vance Jr. gets there, does absolutely nothing. Now, I haven't done any deep reporting on why Cyrus Vance didn't do anything, but we all know that Cyrus Vance didn't do anything. And now Alvin Bragg has to do this, right? And now we read this thing. And at first I thought, okay, well, maybe I just haven't gotten to the page yet that's going to hit me hard. It is a hush money case involving a hooker and some money and him giving the money to Cohen and then Cohen misrepresenting the money in front of the IRS. Okay. The question is, should we be prosecuting president over that? A president who is responsible for a lot of other things that it would seem to me are a hell of a lot more important, namely the U.S. Capitol getting attacked after he got up and told everybody to go down to the U.S. Capitol, effectively attack it. Nobody's prosecuting for that. I don't see Merrick Garland doing anything on that. So I think that it is an understatement to say that this is federal and Merrick Garland should be doing it. What is Merrick Garland doing? Where is Merrick Garland? It is crazy to me to read this thing and know about all the other things that we know, much of which involves Donald Trump incriminating himself on interviews and on video. This is not difficult stuff to find. This reminds me of the Martha Stewart case. It reminds me of the Shaka Fatah case. Nobody can give me a straight reason to this day as to why Shaka Fatah was prosecuted. When I'm going to say the same thing I've said when it's Black politicians about Donald Trump. You know, you see prosecutions sometimes that are very complicated. Nobody can explain it in one sentence. That's what makes me suspicious. It's not that I don't think that maybe he's guilty of these things. These alleged things he's likely guilty of. The question is, should that case be brought? Should that case be brought? And in this case, unlike others, you have other things that could have been brought that it seems to me are far more serious than what he was doing with Stormy Daniels. I don't care what he was doing with Stormy Daniels. I didn't care what Bill Clinton was doing. You know, yes. Did Bill Clinton lie under oath? Yes, Bill Clinton lied under oath. He lied about an affair. Okay. So we have to ask the question, are we going to prosecute over that thing? And if just like in the Martha Stewart case, everybody asked the question, would this person be prosecuted if it wasn't Martha Stewart? I think that answer is a clear no. And I think it's a clear no for Donald Trump. I hear myself saying it. I'm not a fan of Donald Trump. I'm not a fan of having to say it. But when I read this case, I'm like, are you kidding me? This is all we got.
Well, yeah, and so it seems, Lauren, and we're going to go to Attorney Tarver now, but it seems that what happened inside that courtroom yesterday, you know, he got Trump was early. In fact, he was on time or early or whatever. The arraignment went really well. The fingerprinting went well. Everything went smoothly. But then they got in the courtroom, and a procedure that was supposed to take no more than 10-15 minutes took an hour. And here is where Donald Trump is a problem, is a menace to society, because that hour was spent. Now we know why they spent that hour in that courtroom. The district attorney Alvin Bragg was laying out that they needed to be some sort of protective order because you had Donald Trump Jr. putting Alvin Bragg's daughter photos of her online. You had the threats that Trump has made against Alvin Bragg, whether you could say they were overt or not, they were threats.
And the judge's daughter, Don
And
Jr.
the judge's daughter is what I meant.
Mhm.
Thanks for correcting me. The judge's daughter, posting pictures of the judge's daughter. These are threats that you and I and anybody else, I would dare say a senator or a U.S. House of Representatives would be locked up for. What happened inside that courtroom yesterday. You cannot
I agree
make
with you.
threats.
I agree with you, Stacey. But we got to get to the big game. The big game is treason. The big game.
Oh
is
yeah, without question. But my point is, I agree with I agree with how you broke it down. But what I'm saying is that they spent an hour in that courtroom because Donald Trump made threats to the judge and to the prosecutor. You and I would be locked up in handcuffs for that. But Attorney Tarver, I know we're getting off track there, but these charges, most of them in that charging document, it repeats itself. 34 counts. We know that district attorneys tend to overcharge. What do you see here in these?
Let me see if I can respond to some of the earlier comments. First and foremost, this is a charge that is brought routinely in New York. This is not unusual. So just because it appears small and unusual to the outside public, this happens routinely in Manhattan. These types of charges are brought. So it's not something that is unusual here in this area. It's not something that's specious in this area. And the real question is, when people talk about whether or not these charges should be brought, is the question as to whether or not we should look the other way on unlawful conduct? Should we wait and not prosecute? Do we just lay it aside and say, okay, he did these crimes, or we believe he did these crimes? No, the sovereign prosecutor has to act for the protection of his or her district, notwithstanding whatever the political climate says outside. You can't let that rule you as the prosecutor. But as we look at this is exactly what I talked about when we were on the program last week. 34 counts. I said that they were going to be related to the falsification of business records. And what people have to understand here is that old cliche, it's not the crime, it's the cover-up. And basically, Donald Trump and his cronies are paying off people to be able to control this information. $30,000 to the doorman, $150,000 to Karen McDougal, $130,000 to Stormy Daniels. And that can be done if you're not doing it to try to influence outside parties. Yeah, it has federal overtones, but the problem in New York is the falsification of the business records. If they had not tried to cover this up, if they had accurately recorded it, if they had accurately said what these things were, then you might not have the same level of problem. It would still be a problem if you're doing it to avoid, but you'd probably have misdemeanors as opposed to the potential of felonies here. Each of these counts is an additional business record falsification. So every time that you put something in a check ledger that's improper, false, or meant to cover up, that is its own individual crime. So that's really what this indictment is all about. And it may not, it doesn't have the thunder of a lot of other things, but it is important because what we've done is normalize Donald Trump's behavior at chipping away at different areas. Finally, someone, as Lauren said, it's going to be a black prosecutor, but finally someone has made the decision that the buck stops here. And it may be a small buck, but it is a buck nonetheless.
Wow. Well, Trump himself, I mean, he had never, apparently in his adult life, Mark, been in a situation where he was not in control of the proceedings. He, in fact, tweeted or on his Truth Social, just as he walked into the courtroom, "Can't believe this is happening." Wake up call, right?
Yeah, he can't believe it also because he's never been on this side as a criminal defendant. He's been litigious in a lot of civil matters. And, that's small potatoes to him. Usually he doesn't want to pay people. He gets sued. He still doesn't pay them. Or he's suing people for something silly. So this is a big deal. Um, of course, I agree with Lauren that the feds should get in this. Now, what's going on? There are several pieces that are happening. You have these 34 counts in New York. You have a civil case at the state level with Letitia James. You have the E. Jean Carroll suit, the defamation suit, the one who's accused him of rape. And then you've got the prosecutor, Jack Smith, who's looking at the classified documents and presumably also looking at the insurrection. And he is the one that has to bring that. That's the big enchilada. The insurrection charge would disqualify him from running for president ever again. That's the only one of these that would put that in motion and disqualify him. So he's got a lot on his plate. This is probably not the biggest one or the most salacious one, although we learned yesterday that they paid a doorman $30,000 who alleged he had another child out of wedlock. Now, they say that wasn't true,
Right?
but you in pretty bad shape if you have been doing so much you can't remember whether something is true or not. That there's a possibility that is true, just because that's your reputation and you know what you've been doing all over the place. So that particular story may not be true, but I'm sure there's some other folk out here who got may have some little baby Donald Trumps running around. And this was just one instance of that. And they didn't even question it. The audience should know, too, it's not just Cohen either. We're talking about the National Enquirer, and them being in this triangle of payoff to catch and kill stories, including the doorman. So they didn't want people to know about all of his indiscretions. And you just can't do that.
Yeah.
Okay, so what? I mean, this is the Charlie Rangel case, right? Remember the Charlie Rangel case of he didn't pay his taxes on the vacation house? This is one of these victimless crime cases. And by the way, we ignore crimes all the time. We're ignoring the weed stuff. We're ignoring jaywalking. We, in our society, decide to ignore certain crimes all the time. The idea that this raises to the level with a guy who has done some of the things that Donald Trump has done, how does that happen? Now, you remember, there was that guy, Mark Pomerantz, that was on 60 Minutes complaining about how Alvin Bragg isn't doing this and isn't doing that. I actually think that's the reason why we're at this moment, that Bragg said to himself, this guy that used to work in my office made fun of me that I didn't prosecute, so now I'm going to bring this prosecution. I don't know how progressives can argue for progressive justice reform on certain issues, that we shouldn't do broken windows and this and that, and then sit here and act like what we just read yesterday is where this case should have gone.
But Lauren,
it should have gone federal first.
Yeah, but let me throw this. Wait, but
are you suggesting that that this doesn't rise to the level of a crime?
Yeah, I'm not saying that what's
then I have to disagree, and let me tell you why I have to disagree. Because you're looking at it from your perspective of Donald Trump and who he is, but people are routinely prosecuted in New York City for this crime. People have gone to jail routinely for this crime in New York City.
Okay,
so what people are asking is to lay aside the fact that Donald Trump is doing what he does and is a crime in New York City, because there is a larger picture of what criminality he's done.
You're damn right. You're damn right. That's exactly what I'm saying.
If what
is alleged happened, yes, it's a crime. Okay. But the problem is you're dealing with somebody who has done other things that are far worse. And apparently we're going to ignore that to talk about Stormy Daniels.
Well,
until
no, wait,
December.
Lauren, wait,
And then-
hang on. There is no suggestion that the other stuff is being ignored. We talked
Okay,
about
let's see. Where
Willis
is it?
and
Why is Alvin Bragg the first person? Where
well,
is it?
somebody has to be
Well,
first, right?
let-
And to say that this is a victimless crime. Wait, Alvin Bragg said it's not a victimless crime. The voters of New York were the victims, he said.
Really?
Well, and
The
That's
voters
what
of
Alvin
New
Bragg said.
Okay.
the voters,
All right.
the voters
I mean,
of America were the
I would
victims.
argue, as somebody who's got more than just a few friends working at the U.S. Capitol, that 4 dead cops aren't victims.
Oh no,
as well,
see,
of his
Lauren,
nonsense.
I think what
And
you're saying, we all
if
agree with.
we can prosecute these
But
Joe from South Carolina on what we're
yes, but
prosecuting on the
Lauren,
U.S.
wait,
Capitol, we can do
hold
that
on,
with the
Lauren.
president.
But hold on, Lauren. Your argument is that and I'm hearing what you're saying, but the argument here is that he should be prosecuted for all his crimes.
He should be
and
prosecuted for
out,
the top thing first.
well,
Why is
that's
that
out
not-
of the purview of New York. That's not in New York's
I
purview.
get it. You know that New York is probably in some way, these people are communicating, right? Wasn't New York, wasn't Cyrus Vance saying that he was told to stand down until the feds did whatever?
Well, Cyrus Vance,
were
I
gonna
don't
do?
take anything at face value what Cyrus Vance has ever said. That could have just simply been to cover his own behind. Cyrus Vance is a guy who rested on the laurels of the movie producer Weinstein or whatever, but and then came out with that ridiculous statement, which I will never forget and forgive him for.
Right.
Was that just the basis of an allegation? An allegation alone should be enough for a conviction, is what this man said. A sitting prosecutor made that statement. So, I could care less about Cyrus Vance. Attorney Tarver, I hear what Lauren is saying, but this is New York. What Willis is doing in Georgia is these are all separate, but Lauren wants the biggie. She wants the insurrection charge. And I think we all agree.
I don't
with
blame her. And quite frankly, if the evidence is there, that's going to move forward. The problem is that we can't ask one person to stand down on the possibility that there may be a prosecution somewhere else. I don't know if Georgia's coming. I mean, quite frankly, I got to tell you, I don't know if there's going to be a prosecution in Georgia, given what the legislature has been able to do with regard to chipping away to a prosecutor's power. I don't know what's going to happen on the federal level, given the fact that we haven't seen the action, as Lauren says. But I do know that if the district attorney of New York has the evidence in a case where he has prosecuted before and is routinely prosecuted, and the evidence there, I know they have to move forward. I think just from a prosecutorial point of view, I would love to see something go beyond that. But quite frankly, this guy's got an obligation from where he is, and he can't look away.
Mark, you're holding your head.
And no, it's no. And not only that, I mean, what was Al Capone? You have to get people on what you can get them on. And as I said, we have all these other cases going on simultaneously. They're not dead. Those are prosecutions that more than likely will take place. I think something will happen in Georgia. I think too much work has gone into it. Merrick Garland is no longer making the decision at the DOJ. You have a special prosecutor doing it. But obviously there's more evidence that's being gathered. So I don't think because one goes before the others that nullifies the others. Hopefully the others will come. But I also would disagree that these are victimless crimes, because the voters were the victims, and obviously the immediate victims were some of the individuals that he exploited and took advantage of, including these women, and possibly a third one. We don't know about the wedlock piece. We haven't been able to confirm that. And to suggest that those go by the wayside, no. And then here's something else that's important. This man called for the Central Park Five to get the death penalty. So we supposed to let him walk? We supposed to say, because this isn't the coup de grace, just let him off on that? Absolutely not. And I stand with the Central Park Five, and how they feel about the importance of this prosecution.
You know, progressives argue all the time that weed is a victimless crime, right? That it's no big deal. Why are we prosecuting people on weed? If he could be prosecuted for saying that the Central Park Five should be getting the death penalty, which is exactly what he did, of course he'd be guilty of that. I mean, I'm just arguing that it amazes me that people sit on their hands, back to Cyrus Vance, sit on their hands, and then Alvin Bragg has to show up and do it, or Fannie Willis has to show up and do it. His stuff is on tape, a lot of this stuff, with him admitting that he's done certain things. And now, you know, we got a special, what do you need a special prosecutor for at DOJ? For some of the stuff he's admitted to in interviews on CNN. I mean, come on. When have we ever seen somebody not only break the law, and then say they're breaking the law on an interview?
Well, it's like I said, Lauren, what happened in that courtroom yesterday for an hour. The DA had to run down to the judge how the threats that this man continues to make, these are criminal acts.
And do you see anybody calling them back today to say we're about to sanction him for that? No,
well,
you don't.
Understand what that's about. Here's what Trump and his family and others are trying to do in that particular case. What they want to do is they want to throw as much dirt at this judge as they can, so that they can get this judge to do something, to react, so that they can then say, well, look, he obviously has a prejudice, a bias toward us because he believes that we were threatening his family. They'll do this over and over again. This is what's done in mob cases all the time. So you got to recognize that they're just acting as the Castellani family acted in New York in the past, as the Gambino family acted. That's what they would do. They would throw out these insults and say, well, the judge is conflicted because he believes that there's that they've personally offended him. We're going to see this over and over again, and the judge is going to have to be very careful as to how he reacts. So that's the problem here.
Well, we also know that, going with your mafia analogy, that when there's a threat against a prosecutor or a judge, there is also charges brought on those grounds too, or at least added to the indictment anyway somehow. But or charges, but somehow, again, I just keep going back to what happened in that courtroom yesterday, that we now know they spent an hour discussing how to mitigate these threats.
Well, I'll tell you something. As somebody who does communications for attorneys, you know, attorneys are terrible at communication strategy because they get into the weeds of some sort of code section that most people can't understand. And this is going to be challenging, not only because of what the underlying charges are, but presenting this to a jury in a straight line and having that jury understand what this is and then make a ruling. Maybe in New York, they'll get lucky because it's probably going to be a fairly liberal jury. But you need a case that is easier to explain than what I read yesterday. That's what I would say. And also, to your point, Stacey, by the way, the next appointment in court is December. Really? Really? I mean, you know, I know that our court system is really busy and everybody's racked and everybody's overbooked, but December.
Well, as of yesterday, Lauren, just to your point, I guess, as of yesterday, there have been in that court, Manhattan criminal court, approximately 8,000 nonviolent felony cases that are being brought to date in this year. So there's talk about a backlog. That's, I mean, right. But there is so much to this, Mark. What's next, Mark?
Well, two things. Lauren brought up the date. That's at his own disadvantage. He could have asked for the 60-day speedy trial piece to go into effect. He chose not to. What he's done is put himself in a position, him and his attorneys, that this is going to drag out into 2024 when he's trying to have the primary. So the court didn't do him a favor by setting the next date to December. He didn't do himself a favor. Plus, the E. Jean Carroll case, I think, is imminent. I think that's coming up shortly. And then I think definitely the Tish James case is in October. So all of these things will be running into the 2024 election, and he won't have the ability to catch and kill those stories or hush that. I have a question for Attorney Tarver. Attorney Tarver, why do you think Bragg did not go for a conspiracy charge? Because if there was a conspiracy charge, he would have, and found guilty on that, he would have had to do some jail time, wouldn't he?
Well, generally, looking at this, I had the same question. Generally, when that happens and you don't see the conspiracy charge, it's because you have witnesses who are cooperating. You have someone like a Pecker who has voluntarily come forward and said, okay, I'm going to move forward with it. I'm going to help you out. You've got other people, the doorman, the other people like that, whoever was involved here. And rather than bring a charge against them to compel them to do that, these are people who have given favorable testimony that we don't even know about and have been part of a cooperating scheme. Weisselberg likely has given some cooperating testimony because, as you read in the statement, it talks about him actually accelerating or increasing the amount to $360,000. It's not Trump that had to do that. It's actually the CFO who had to do that. So you've got a number of players who could be involved in a conspiratorial scheme, but realistically, they're not charged. Why? Because they're doing it voluntarily for the most part. That's usually the most plausible answer.
But even without charging them with conspiracy, he alone still wouldn't be eligible for the charge? Or do you need more than one person?
Well, in order to conspire, you have to agree with at least one other person to do that. So he could technically be charged with that. But I think they probably found it more convenient not to do that because you would probably have to name the other two people in the conspiracy.
Well,
and they could be unindicted conspirators, but you're saving them the whole issue of having to go through the mud.
Yeah. Well, December 4th is the next date. I think many of us are tired of talking about Donald Trump, and we will see if we can hold off until December 4th and talking about Donald Trump. But in the meantime, a couple of other things we wanted to discuss this morning with this all-star panel. After mounting backlash on social media, First Lady Jill Biden's office backed away from statements that the First Lady made, saying that she wanted the defeated Iowa women's basketball team to be invited to the White House. In addition to the national title winner LSU, Jill Biden apparently apologized for her comments, rescinded. I don't know if she rescinded the invitation to Iowa or not, but nonetheless, Angel Reese said LSU is going to visit the Obamas instead. This, I think, and Lauren, perhaps you can talk more to this. It's a public relations nightmare for the Biden administration.
Yeah, well, that's because the First Lady commented on something she didn't need to comment on because she felt sorry for a bunch of white girls that played for Iowa and their feelings. Okay, that's what happened here. And the underlying premise of this entire conversation that nobody wants to put out there, I'll put it out there. You had 5 white girls playing on Iowa. You had 5 black girls, one from the Bronx, by the way, playing on LSU. And so this became Jack Johnson. It became, Apollo Creed versus Rocky in everybody's head. I wouldn't say in everybody's head, but in a lot of people's. And of course, what happens is, this is a sport that black people excel in, basketball, right? So what happens is LSU wins huge. And then Jill Biden decides that the white girls at Iowa need to have a cookie. I mean, that made no sense because nobody that I've ever, maybe I'm wrong. I got to check my history. I've never seen a losing team get invited to the White House. Maybe that's happened and I don't know about it, but if it has, that's something that has escaped me. That made absolutely no sense whatsoever. It's all about, participation trophies and everybody feeling good. By the way, Caitlin Clark isn't complaining about anything, and Angel Reese isn't complaining about.
Caitlin Clark actually came out on the show yesterday and said, "I've never heard of the losers being invited either."
Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese ain't saying nothing. This is all about people on Twitter that are pissed that Iowa got a lot of racists, by the way, on Twitter that are pissed that Iowa got crushed. That's what this is about. The 2 players aren't even saying anything. The teams aren't even saying anything. I had a 50-part argument on Twitter with some white dude from Indiana who's actually not a bad dude. But I finally said to him, why are you more upset about this than Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese, who are actually there, who are a part of this story? And it's about race. They don't want to admit it, but that's what it is.
Yeah. Well, Mark, Angel obviously she said it was about race. She knew it was about race. And the whole thing is, she said, you know, you guys all year long, you've called me hood, you've called me this, you called me
Right.
that. She is standing by. And even with the knowledge of Joe Biden rescinding her former statement, her previous statement, Angel Reese said, you know what? She rolled her eyes and said, we're going to Obama's.
It's also
Mark,
too about a society not being used to seeing women very assertive, particularly Black women, but white women as well. We're not used to seeing this assertive level of play like the guys do. Because if this was guys, we would be rolling our eyes and yawning.
well,
I mean,
this tournament, the women's side, Lauren, the women's side this year, the last couple of years, was much more exciting than the men's
yeah,
side.
yeah, that's true. That's true.
And
I
Mark, I
agree.
know you follow
Mhm.
sports. I know you're a big sports guy. But you know, goes a little bit beyond sports. They've taken it beyond sports, Mark.
Yeah, Joe Biden was really out of touch, and I mean, everything does not warrant a kumbaya moment or a Rodney King can we all just get along moment. She really made a big mistake, and really did not understand the fragility of her husband's electoral coalition. And
That's right.
now, in just a few words, she's managed to jeopardize um, um, his um, um, his outreach to young people, to the young African American electorate, and it just was just not well, thought of, and I'm sure that the White House is reeling. I mean, her spokesperson released a statement. I'm sure they're trying to put that genie back in the bottle.
Yeah, they sending her to
It's
King Charles's coronation.
yeah. Well, she was
Right.
always going anyway. No president has ever gone to that, gone to a coronation, but in Britain. But um, she really messed this one up for her husband. So I don't know what they're going to do, because Angel speaks for a lot of young people
That's right.
who are kind of looking at the Bidens and saying, we really going to do this again, or this
Right.
is the only option we have, and maybe now is the time. Uh, Speaking of women and speaking of Black women, maybe it is a time to stop sidelining Kamala. Maybe it is the time that the White House uses this opportunity to bring her more out in the forefront to speak to some of these concerns, because Jill just can't do it. I think she may have irreparably harmed herself.
Yeah,
And the harm here is really huge, because it's not as simple as just these two teams. You got to recognize the buildup. There had been South Carolina, which was an all-black team that came before this.
Yep.
The media was characterizing them as thugs.
Yep.
You had Dawn Staley coming out and pushing back against that. So the racial paradigm had already been set coming into this game, and it was really, really deep. The problem is, you've got these young ladies, even the white young ladies from Iowa and the ones from LSU and South Carolina, who play together at different times during the year, practice together at different events and things like that. So they didn't have necessarily that same beef. They had a competitive beef, but to hear them say it wasn't that type of thing. But this was a huge public relations nightmare, in my estimation.
Yeah, and you're right.
Massive.
This is where they're going to have to lean on the vice president to try and pull them out of this hole. And it's just a few words dug a huge hole. And I think Mark Thompson, of course, hit it on the head. It's an electorate that they just cannot afford to lose in any way, shape, or form. So we'll see what happens going forward. Another big court case is going on. It's happening in the nation's capital. Academy Award winner Leonardo DiCaprio took the stand on Monday as the first blockbuster witness in the star-studded trial of former Fugees member Praz. Praz is accused of participating in a global campaign finance conspiracy funded by a Malaysian businessman who allegedly stole billions of dollars from a Malaysian sovereign wealth fund. Of course, Praz has pleaded not guilty. The scene of having Leo DiCaprio on the stand on Monday was really interesting, because when asked his occupation, he laughed and said, "I'm an actor." And although he was a prosecution witness, he was really there. I want to say almost reluctantly against Praz, But this is a case, Attorney Tarver, I don't know how much you followed this particular case, but this is a case that talks about illegal campaign funds directed to the Obama campaign.
I haven't followed it at all, quite frankly. The only thing that I was really impressed about was the witness list in this. The witness list in this thing reads like a who's who.
Yeah, like a red carpet to a Hollywood event.
And here's the interesting thing. I mean, in most of those cases, people will just throw someone on the witness list, and it's a fantasy. But here, because you may have some real direct participation in people with funds, so at least from the limited points that I've read, you may get a lot of these people who are celebrities actually going into the courtroom and having to testify. It's amazing that DiCaprio was there in and of itself.
Yeah, he kicked it off, a first star witness. And, again, Lauren, I don't know how much you followed, but it's right there in D.C. It's taking place there in D.C.
Oh, really? I don't know anything about this case whatsoever. I do find it interesting, though, when we talk about campaign finance cases, that this case would be broad. I mean, that part has got me more attention than any of the details, which I don't know any of the details. But unless this is going to raise to some sort of RICO level conspiracy, I'm wondering, why are we talking about this? I mean, there's so many cases and so many things that happen, particularly with campaign finance related matters, that are suspicious. So it's always interesting which case ends up getting into court. So I can't wait to read the details.
Yeah, well, Praz faces at least 20 years in prison if he's convicted.
Oh, really? That's interesting.
Yeah,
that's very interesting. Yeah, that's very interesting. I mean, it kind of reminds me of the other case, the one with the rapper, and we're prosecuting for the lyrics that he said.
That's
it's just
Fonnie Willis.
The cases that get brought that end up, I mean, I think R. Kelly is guilty. Don't get me wrong. I do think R. Kelly is guilty, but in 60, 70 years of rock and roll, the fact that he's the only guy that ends up in jail on a sex thing as a guy that's a musician, I just find that interesting. It's not that I don't think he's guilty. It's not that I don't think he should be prosecuted. But if he should be prosecuted, there sure as hell is we had Jerry Lee Lewis, who recently passed away. Not only did he date an underage person, his cousin that was 13, that he then married, he had 2 wives that died mysteriously that nobody ever said anything about. I mean, so I'm not saying R. Kelly's innocent. R. Kelly, I think, is guilty as hell. And yes, that should, but it's like, it amazes me the things that get into court and the things that don't get into court.
Well, amazing. Mark, this is an interesting case because it reaches back to the Obama administration, and you have this Asian businessman who's at large. He's been charged and they can't find him, but Praz is on trial as his co-conspirator.
Well, I think it brings us back to our original conversation. This is about the Obamas, first black couple in the White House. This is about a brother who was with the Fugees. People who look like us get prosecuted every day. Whether we agree with the prosecution or not, they still are coming for us. So I don't know all of the details of this case either. I think, as the days go by, more of us are going to get more interested in it. But one of the reasons we don't know about it because it's pretty routine. It's not even breaking news when a black person is prosecuted for something or accused or alleged, just like Angel Reese and LSU, just like the South Carolina basketball team. We're all criminalized anyway. That is the image of us to be criminalized. So yeah, it's about time that someone who's not black, but someone who's orange has to face accountability for whatever crimes he's accused of. So I don't mind that at all. But we'll just have to see what happens. Again, I don't know a lot about the case. I know there's a lot on the table and it looks compelling. We'll just have to see what comes of it.
We got to get a hold of the media. I mean, the media is what drives these narratives one way or the other. And, the idea that somebody can't sit down. I mean, there's a site that tracks exonerations. And every time I look up and see who's getting exonerated, it's a black male. And we're not hearing nothing about that. But it's just amazing. If we were to do a chart of like what gets into court and what doesn't, if it happens on the blue collar level, if black people are disproportionately, treated badly on the blue collar level, of course it would happen on the white collar level. Why would it be any different? And every time, every time a member of the Congressional Black Caucus will get prosecuted, again, it's not that I thought that charges may or may not have been true, but the question is, who is deciding that prosecution goes forward? That is a huge question. And the media never looks at that. Who gets to decide who gets into court and who doesn't?
Well,
but I think the media did look at Trump and Bragg, because Bragg, from all indications, did not want to charge a former president. He held up. He didn't want to do that. And that was of serious concern. And it goes back to the question of whether or not someone like Trump should be let off the hook.
Well,
I think that's a very, very serious,
the media
but let me say something. We're never let off the hook. We're not. That's not my opinion. That is a fact.
Yeah, and
so
with that,
it
Mark,
doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense for us to argue.
You do
that
realize
he should be let off the hook.
The media will always focus on Donald Trump because he is money. That's why we just watched 48 straight hours of his car, his plane taking off, landing.
But that's not all they focus on.
They're
They
making
also
money
focus
off Donald Trump. They're making money off Donald Trump. They will never get off Donald Trump ever.
But I don't know that that's the subject we're talking about.
Absolutely, that's true.
No,
here's the thing.
I'm not saying that's untrue, but I don't think that's the point of the subject. The media will also argue.
Yeah, we're running
for us to be exonerated.
We're running out of time, so let's just jump into this right quick. We only have a few minutes left. 3 Democratic Tennessee lawmakers are facing an expulsion resolution after Republicans said their gun control protest violated the chamber's rules of decorum. It's an extraordinarily rare rebuke from state lawmakers following the Nashville school shooting. They're saying that these guys were trying to start an insurrection. Attorney Tarver, is that like chutzpah or what?
It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous, but it goes to show you what you can do when you have the political power and the political might in a chamber to do whatever you want to do. So we have true insurrectionists, basically, who are sitting in that same chamber. People who have sided with the January 6th insurrection, who have been a part of, people who have given financial support to those individuals as well as other support. And yet you can turn it around and say, hey, this is you guys are doing this. The bottom line is really this. If we haven't understood at this point yet that we need to wake up and start voting at the local level, because that's what Florida's showing you, is those local legislators who are making these laws that are really crushing us. I see a lawsuit here. The fact of the matter is there's no way they're going to be able to legitimately quash the will of the people to have these individuals represent them. It's very clear, at least in some of the federal case law, that would be a huge problem.
Wow. Well, Mark, Tennessee, you said you're headed there? Mark has frozen up on us. Lauren, last words on this Tennessee situation.
I'll be there.
Go ahead, Mark.
I'll be there tomorrow. I'll be there tomorrow for the vote. Some of us will be there and support. Justin Jones is a good friend of mine and a member of the church I grew up in Nashville, Clark Memorial. And this is an awesome thing. He was targeted by the state attorney general for prosecution for some of the nonviolence he's been involved in over the years. Again, another brother prosecuted, because we get prosecuted all the time. He was being prosecuted. He beat that one election, and this is retaliation against the will of the voters who supported him and put him in office. The other representatives stood up against gun violence, and it is a shame. The true insurrection is against them. That is the insurrection that would prevent them from holding office. But I'll be joining them in Nashville in the morning.
Wow, Lauren, it would seem to be rich if they did expel them on the grounds of an insurrection.
Well, this is not about Justin Jones and what's going on in Tennessee. This is about a strategy that these right-wing Trump MAGA Republicans have embraced of when we disagree with somebody, we try to extrajudiciously in some weird way take them out of power. They're trying to do that with Fannie Willis. They're talking openly about doing it with Alvin Bragg. The Congress, Jim Jordan and these people are openly talking about, oh, we got to have him in here, because the majority in this country is changing. The minorities in this country are going to be majority in about 20 years. They know it, and they're losing their grip on power and control. And now they're coming up with these weird, crazy ways to take duly elected people who've been chosen by the majority of whatever place they're from out of power. That's what they're doing. And they're openly doing it. They're openly, there's no pretense, there's no lead up. They are just openly do it. Tried to do it with Joe Biden. If you're going to try to do it with a white guy, what do we think is going to happen with black elected officials? They tried to do it with Joe Biden because they didn't like the fact that he beat Donald Trump by 8 million votes. And they're out in the open. And that is why, by the way, it is important to prosecute the president for treason. These things are treasonous. I mean, we need to have that discussion. And so it leads back to that.
Well, I think Attorney Tarver totally agrees with that, Attorney Tarver.
No question. And to any suggestion that we shouldn't prosecute Donald Trump to the highest on those other levels, I'm with that 100%. I'm as frustrated as the next person, because quite frankly, having put together these types of prosecutions as a prosecutor myself and defending them as a defense attorney, it should not be taking this long. You can move forward on at least some of these charges, and you can always add charges. That's the other thing. You can supersede with an indictment and add additional charges. But the fact of the matter is, time can run out here. You can't have a 2024 election that renders everything that Jack Smith and others do completely moot. You could have the legislature taking Fannie Willis out at some point and replacing her with someone who's ineffective. So it's time really to get it, put your money where your mouth is. You have to do what you have to do, or don't do it at all.
Well, I think we have officially lost Mark. So, but we appreciate Make It Plain himself. We appreciate you, Attorney Tarver, and Lauren Burke of the Burke File. Thank you so much for joining us this morning to break this all down. And thank you all for watching Let It Be Known. We'll see you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.